Hello everyone, this is Terrence with the tskgread.com website. This is a trying to do a daily vlog, at least I'm trying to. And so what I want to talk about today is the whole China and Hong Kong situation. So the British government decided to basically because Hong Kong was basically a area where it was not even developed. It was just a bunch of rocky islands back when the British Empire was fully at its height. And so the British had a settlement there, and so it all kind of stems from the British government having a settlement there, and so there's a bunch of Hong Kong people that are going to be shifted over from British rule to Chinese rule, and actually there was an interesting thing about that. Back in the early days of Hong Kong, like back in like 80s and 90s, there's been a lot of people were like, yeah, I'm Chinese. I refer to myself as a Chinese, not a Hong Konger. And now that kind of, there's a lot more Hong Kongers, people who identify as Hong Kong than China. And especially because when China decided to try to force or did a lot of violence against Hong Kong back in 2014, and so that kind of had a spike of support of being Hong Kong, not China. And so there's a lot of people in Hong Kong that wants to stay Hong Kong, and so and this is where I don't like this whole narrative of the British Empire or the British former empire giving this particular city-state over to China. And so back in the day, back in the 90s, back in the 80s and 90s, China, for instance, the economy of Hong Kong was a very big part of Chinese, Chinese economy. And so the China economy was kind of like that. If it weren't for Hong Kong, it would have been there's a separation of there's enough separation of economics between China and Hong Kong, but in China's eyes, that's a big portion of the economy back in the 90s, and Hong Kong has been there's a lot of freedoms in Hong Kong, and China doesn't like that, and so no government likes to have their people free. And so, and even within the United States, there's, yeah, sure, we're one of the freer countries in the world, and we can do whatever we want, but not really, because there's the drug war, there's this and that, but we're kind of free. We're not 100% free, but so yeah, there's in terms of Hong Kong, I would rather see Hong Kong as a city-state than being taken over China, or even taken over by the U.S., or even taken over by, really by any country. Like, any established country should not take over Hong Kong. Hong Kong should be a city-state. Now, if China didn't necessarily wage that many that not necessarily a war, but that skirmish that they'd done against Hong Kong. If it weren't for that, I think they would have been pretty chill about it, and they'd have been like, okay, this is what it is now. Okay, so we'll do this. But because China did did that skirmish back in 2014, not so much of a skirmish, but more of that heavy-handed police mentality. A lot of people are like, yeah, we don't like China anymore. And China never really liked Hong Kong because Hong Kong has more control over their own, has more autonomy over their system than the China, not so much the China government, but the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party is basically the one that is really just it's the most powerful political party in the world. So, and the whole aspect of having, like, there's not really that. So there's the government of China, and then there's the Communist Party, which is leeching off of the government, and so, and they have their own army. They're like, it's like basically saying that the Republicans and the Democrats have their own army, and then there's no real actual army. It's just a political army, like an actual and the thing with the political army, it's vastly different. Okay, so a traditional government military, a government military in a sense is more well suited to it has more strength than a political army. And because the fundamentals of a government army is vastly different than a political army. And I'm not saying that either one is better or worse. It's just a statement of a fact, at least with the Chinese Party army, like the Chinese Communist Party, like the Republic of China Party or whatever. I don't know what the technical name is, because I don't really care about the actual technical name of a statist regime, so to speak. That's just basically evil, and they're like kind of blatantly evil. And then also China is under the United States is being not so much directly attacked by China, but it's a different type of Cold War. So like right now, China is trying to infiltrate the United States and like literally take corn and other things from the U.S. to China, so China can make a knockoff. And they've been trying to do this for years and years and years, but now it's getting to a point where they're trying to like basically have a bunch of knockoffs against China, like against the United States. And the problem with a knockoff, like even with like the knockoff mentality, it's still not they're still always gonna be behind. China is always going to be behind the U.S. in terms of technology. Because if they're always trying to knock off, they're always trying to, like, not necessarily steal information. It's the whole debate of the intellectual property rights. I'm not going to really get into it in this one. I know where I stand, but in terms of this type of mindset of like, yeah, they're stealing information and they're actually like not necessarily stealing products, but they're maybe selling products. They're buying products over here, and then for the purpose of trying to copy and paste what the American system is. And so the American system is based more on freedom, but the Chinese Communist Party wants the stuff that comes from freedom, but not allowing freedom. They're trying to have the benefits of a free society without the freedom part of it. And in general, the United States is free, but not on a not according to the metrics that people have used over the years, like the Freedom Index. There's a bunch of indexes that say that the United States is a mostly free country now. It used to be a free country, but now it's just now it's at that lower tier of freedom. So yeah, because of all the laws and regulations that have been passed throughout the decades, has eroded United States freedom and the debt. But you can say, but yeah. So and then this is why I wouldn't mind seeing states to actually succeed from the union. So like if California wants to succeed from the union, let them. If Texas wants to succeed from the union, let them. Let them go their own way, basically. Let them because even if even if California would end up being a more tyrannical state, and if they want that tyrannical state, it's a smaller tyrannical state. Okay, it's not necessarily the state of California. Like if the California as a country becomes a communist hellhole, then that's fine. That's up to them to decide that. And the reason why I would want to have more, even if it runs the risk of California becoming a communist hellhole, they probably end up running back to the United States anyways if they actually become that. But yeah, but right now it's really hard for any state to really succeed from the union because of the financial ties to the federal government. Like even Texas, like Texas is in a bad place. Every state is in a bad place to succeed from the union. The only state that I can see that could theoretically succeed from the union and don't really care is New Hampshire. Like New Hampshire is probably, because the culture of New Hampshire is very much is the most freeing or freedom. The culture of New Hampshire is to be free, and you gotta have that culture as well. It's not just the government or the quote government allowing people to do whatever they want. There also has to be a culture of freedom as well in order for a society to be free. And so if I had to I always try to frame it as if I was to start from scratch, scratch to make my own autonomous city, and how would I go about creating a city that is how would I have my own floating city, and how would I go about making sure the rights of the individuals are upheld without ending up being a tyrannical state after I'm long gone. So that whole type of thing. And so maybe it's theoretically a computer program that basically keeps in check, that keeps keeps things free as like the founder wants it. So like if I found a floating city in the middle of the ocean in international waters, where I can make whatever rules and regulations I particularly want, but like later down in the road, it's really spectacularly free, and then a generation, 2 or 3 later, it's basically like any other state. And to me, that would be a failed state. Now, if I had a computer program to basically monitor the freedoms and somehow have a computer program basically, quote, not really ruling over people, but overseeing the whole, how, and engaging on how free the humanity, all the humans living in that floating city. The scary thing part of that is if it goes, it's a kind of a double-edged sword, so to speak. It's like you want, like, because there's humans that have a desire to rule over other humans, which is fine as long as it's voluntary. And see, this is where we're always going to have hierarchy of, we're always going to have authority. It depends on how that authority structure is what I'm having an issue with. So, I've never consented for any or I mentally consented, but and the whole idea of having a social contract, like, it leads to communism, and it leads to socialism, and it leads to a social contract. The fundamentals of a social contract goes from maybe a free-ish society to a very collectivist society, and so that's why I don't like the whole argumentation of a social contract. Social contract, to me, means very collective, and basically a way that the state rule over, an argumentation that the state can rule over a particular group of people. And so the whole idea, I've heard various people stating the social contract this is a social contract. Like, I never signed or agreed with the social contract. And actually, Tom Woods, a very much of a libertarian thinker, basically kind of deconstruct the whole notion of, and made a nuclear bomb out of, like, basically nuking the social contract out of the water, in my mind. But there's some major issues with the social contract, and so yeah, it's just the fact that the social contract leads to these types of governmental regimes, and there's a lot of people who say that freedoms come from government, but no, they don't come from government. They come from God, and they come from nature, whatever your perspective is. It cannot be founded on the fact that it's from government, because that's other human beings saying that, you can be free, or you can be free in this area, but you can't really be this much free in this particular area. And so the whole idea of having the whole idea of having a social construct, and the whole idea of this notion that that the freedoms come from government is wrong, because eventually government will end up taking away one's freedoms. Sure, they might be able to find a job, or might be able to maybe build a business that is within the constraints of the country. And so, like, if a country, basically the freest part of the country is like fast food joints or whatever, or restaurants, is the most free area, and it's still heavily regulated, but that's where you can do a business can thrive in a place where in a place like the restaurant industry, especially in America, is in fact really, really free in terms of other industries. It's still very, very regulated, but there's enough capitalism in this particular industry of like the food industry, in terms of like restaurants and like sit down restaurants to fast foods to stuff like that. And so that's but freedom, and there's still a lot of heavy constraints against the restaurant and restaurants industry on the federal level, but at the same time, it depends on where you're. It really depends on where the restaurant is located, what jurisdiction that they are under, and so if they're under a very heavy-handed if they're under a place where they are treated relatively free compared to a place where there's a lot of local regulations. And see, this is where the local regulations do play a factor in. And yes, I would rather have it so that there's really no federal government and there's really no state government, and it's just a bunch of local cities and local regions where they can do what they want. So like the region of the United States of America, and then the region of Minnesota, but really the power lies between, but they basically get to do what they want, the cities. So like if a city wants to be an authoritarian city and wants more authoritarianism, let them become more authoritarianism. And because it's just much easier to be like, yeah, I'm out of this city, I'm going to go to the next city that is much more free. And so there's that competition of where people are going to want to move to. Do people want to move into a freer city or an authoritarian superstate, or authoritarian a small authoritarian superstate in regards to that specific, like you're basically controlled from birth to death. Do you want to live in that city, or do you want to live in a city that is free? And so that's kind of where the whole aspect is. And most people would rather live in a city that is free than a city that is authoritarian, because the economics is obviously, and it's been like that for the past 2 centuries, really, or for ages actually. But this is running almost 25 minutes, so that's kind of my take on Hong Kong and just basic government and authoritarian structures and such like that. And so that is my vlog of today. It's a little more philosophical one, a little more political, but mostly philosophical. So thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.